Rob, welcome to Out of the Hourglass. How are you doing today?
Doing well, Molly. Thanks for having me.
I'm very happy to have you, and I feel like we're privileged to have you because this is a very important topic. And I'm grateful that you are here to join us to kind of, one, just bring it back into focus for clients who were at the Grand Summit, and then for those who weren't, kind of bring them into your world a little bit. For those who were at the Grand Summit, remember Rob. He was our keynote on the second day, talking about the important topic of mental health in the workplace and with leadership. And it was an incredible presentation, Rob. Thank you for being there.
Thank you, Molly. It was a great experience being with your team and being with all your clients, and we had some incredible conversations.
Yes. I actually just recorded a podcast with somebody the other day who told me that they were impacted by that presentation. This was after the fact, post recording. We just were kind of debriefing, and it came up. And so it's important that even to this day, 2, 3 months post conference, it's still coming up as something that has resonated. I'm glad to hear that because these are the types of conversations that we want to stick with people every day. For those that didn't have the pleasure of meeting you, getting to hear you speak, or knowing you, can you just give our listeners a quick rundown of who you are, what you do, and where you're from?
I'm Rob Vallentine, and I reside in the state of Michigan, where I have been the last 36 years. I happen to be out on the West Coast today in Los Angeles, which it's a little bit warmer here than it is in Michigan.
And in Philadelphia. You're
Yeah,
quite
and
lucky.
in Philadelphia. That's true.
Yes.
That is
Yes.
true. I have a wife of 41 years, Nancy. We have four incredible adult children that are now married themselves. Each of them have now added to population here in the
Love
US.
it.
We have 8 grandkids, and I think that's the personal part of who I am. I think there's a passion, purpose, career part that we'll get into, I think, as we go through. But I spent
Mhm.
about 31 years in the corporate world. And I think what's important is not the 31 years, but the fact that it literally took me 31 years to get to a place where I was comfortable sharing about my own mental health story. And I think that when you grow up and struggle, you think, I'm never going to tell anybody about some of this stuff that happened. And I've gotten to a point in my life now where the passion part is saying, you know what, I'm going to help others recover out loud so that they don't have to struggle in silence like I did. And
Yeah.
to get to that point feels really good, quite frankly. And I know that I'm still work in progress.
Well, it's a gift that you are now able to give to others, through your teachings and your kind of in your counseling, to be able to kind of use an experience and now, for the good, kind of Brian would call it your second mountain. You've kind of have found purpose in this, second part of your life, where you're looking at kind of giving back and making a difference. What drove you to turn your own experience, your own trauma, your own situation into helping others, break the stigma?
I remember a specific day I was sitting in my office and was feeling a lot of frustration that the company that I worked for was not talking about mental health. And it I kind of did the mirror reflection back and said, well, wait a minute. I'm a leader here in the organization. I lead a global team of people, both, yeah, locally and globally. And I decided, well, wait a minute. I want everybody else to talk about mental health, but I'm not willing to talk about my mental health. And I had been a part of, we had different employee networks within our company. And I was a part of the disability employee network because I had a son that was diagnosed with dyslexia when he was a little kid. And that group was just always really helpful to my wife and I as we
Mm-hmm.
worked through having a kid with a disability. And what I recognized is that in all of those meetings over all those years, I really never mentioned the invisible or the hidden disability of mental health. And I
Yeah.
realized that's because of stigma, right? Stigma is something that we have sometimes inside of ourselves. Sometimes it's stigma within our organization. Sometimes it's stigma within our community. And it just hit me that day that I need to start. And so I did, kind of one person at a time, and thought that that would always be the way it was. And then I recognized that the more that I shared about my story, the more I shared about not only the trauma, but shared about the healing and the growth that I had, that it kind of attracted others to say, you know what, I can share a part of my story too, that
Yeah.
we don't have to do this alone.
There's something powerful about becoming a little bit more of an open book about something that's vulnerable, that you then almost give permission to others to share a piece of vulnerability from themselves and begin to normalize the conversation a little bit, it becomes a stigma because no one talks about it. But once you begin to normalize the conversation, gosh, the weight comes off shoulders. I mean, I can only imagine the impact that you have felt through kind of opening up and talking about your journey and, how it's, you were healing, but I can only imagine this has continue to heal you in some capacity, but also how it's impacted others.
Yeah, as you mentioned, there's this moment that happens that I've learned this, right? When someone is authentic, when someone is vulnerable, when someone is courageous. And I'm reminded right now I went to a presentation a gentleman shared about in the community where I lived at the time, shared about living in a family with domestic violence. And he was so vulnerable, so courageous. And I thought, my goodness, how did he do that? I was immediately connected, and I don't think I've ever done this in my life, but I sent a text to somebody and said, "Can I get so and so's phone number because I need to talk to him?"
Mm.
And I thanked him for sharing a part of his story, and I said to him, "How'd you do that?" I go, "How'd you do that?"
Yeah. Teach me.
And I said, "Teach me. I feel like I want to do that, but I don't know how."
Yeah.
And I'll never forget what he said. He said, "Keep working on your recovery, keep healing, and you will know the day when you are ready." And I thought, wow. Now, I did not go tell anybody else about that at that time, but
Hmm.
eventually over time, I think I continued to get stronger and stronger. And the analogy that I used at the conference, and I use this analogy quite often in my life, is that, I was carrying this backpack of rocks, right? And this invisible
Yeah.
backpack that I carried in my life. And I think what happens is as I let those rocks out through healing, through therapy, through support with other peers, I learned that that story is not who I am. It's a story
Hmm.
about what I experienced and how me sharing it actually helps me, but it also helps others around me.
Yeah. How did you go and take that when the moment that, when you realized, I'm ready, how did you take that and bring action to it? I mean, obviously you are now a facilitator of these certification programs. You are a trainer. You go and speak to many organizations. What was the action that you took? How did you know where to get involved?
Yeah, I think the first thing I did, Molly, was I started writing down pieces of my story. That
Okay.
it was a way of putting a voice to not only, again, the hardships, but the healing that happened as a result of that. I also was very fortunate that I had a therapist, still do, that continues to support me on this journey. And her and I together, I kept saying, someday I'm going to write a book.
Hmm.
And she said, well, let's just keep talking here for now, and that will come when it's supposed to come. And I think what really happened is that I realized that after I started sharing it one on one with other people, is their feedback back to me was one of a lot of gratitude. And
Yeah.
that gratitude continued to grow. And I'll tell a story at some point here about, me finally telling it in the corporate world because I was really afraid for a long time to share that story. But once I did, the feedback was, please just keep telling your story. Please
Hmm.
keep talking about hope. Keep talking about healing. You're normalizing therapy. You're breaking stigma because you're talking about anxiety. So again, I think there was a moment of clarity where I didn't let it define me and I needed to put words and voices to what I was going through.
I'm glad you mentioned that gratitude component because I mean, you saw that at our own conference. I mean, I saw people going up to you after and they were impacted in different ways and they wanted a moment. I mean, like you wanted the phone number of that individual who shared, they wanted you opened up permission for them to talk to you about something, whether it be personally or something they experienced with their, a team member or within a family, within their family. I mean, it's safe to say, I think everybody in this world has been impacted by mental health in some capacity, whether it's, personally or through somebody at work or, a friend or a family member. It's just ever present. And so people were impacted in different ways and wanted a moment to come up and talk to you about it. I mean, that alone has to be, as in doing what you're doing, that has got to feel like you're doing something right in a sense. Like you are doing what you were meant to do.
Yeah, and it's interesting when I look back to think about I had promised myself that I would never talk about the trauma that I'd experienced. I would never talk about it
Mm.
out loud. And then getting to the point where talking about it one on one with a therapist, talking about it in a group. I had the great fortune of over the years of being in a couple different groups where there were other people who had experienced childhood trauma like myself. And so there's this part about you're not alone. And
Yeah.
I'm recalling a story where I was walking through the building where I worked, and this was during the time with the Penn State crisis that was going on. And I walked into somebody's office, and during the Penn State crisis, there were TV screens throughout our company that
Hmm.
showed the news and showed employee updates and things like that. And I walked into somebody's office and he said to me, "How are you doing?" And I realized at that point, Molly, I was pretty good at putting a mask on,
Yeah.
many different masks, and everything was fine, right? That's that four-letter F word. I'm fine. How are you?
Oh, yeah. It's a dangerous
And
word.
it is a real dangerous word. And
Yep.
I recognized as he said, "How are you?" I had that moment where I had to decide, am I going to be honest? And all kinds of things went through my head is, if I'm honest, is this going to hurt my career? If I'm honest, is this person going to judge me? If I'm honest, what are they going to think of me? And I said, "Hey, this Penn State thing is really bothering me. I'm triggered by it." I said, "I'm a
Hmm.
survivor of childhood sexual abuse." And he looked at me and it felt like it was an hour. It wasn't, of
Yeah.
course, but he, with tears in his eyes, said, "So am I." And there was
Oh,
this moment that happened where I recognized A, again, I was not alone. B, that there were other people in the corporate world that also might have experienced trauma like I did. And both of us were struggling,
yeah.
and yet nobody around us, because we didn't look like we were struggling. And
Right.
I heard our police chief in our local community talk about, she said, many times people who need help look like people who don't need help. And that was a reminder to me that all of us may look different. And the more I recognize that if I had been there that day and had a stomach issue, or if I had, God forbid, had diabetes or cancer, that it would have been pretty easy to talk about in the corporate world. But it's
Yes.
not at that time. It was not easy to talk about mental health. But each and every time I did, the fear that I had was my own fear. It really wasn't. I've never had anybody hold it against me. I've never had anybody use it. I mean, I guess they may talk about it behind me, but I've
Yeah.
never been affected in a negative way by being honest and being vulnerable and saying, "Hey, I'm hurting and I need help." And getting
Yeah.
that help is what all of us at different times, as you said, in our life need. We all have, I like to say, we all have physical health challenges. We also all have
Yes.
mental health challenges.
Yes.
And why can't we talk about them? And yet, I've realized that actually I can talk about them, and I'm grateful
Well,
today.
it's people like yourself who are who are serving that space, and are what are allowing more folks to talk about it and really bringing it into spaces where it needs a lot of attention. And that's kind of part of the reason, why you're here with us and why we asked you to speak at the conference. We see a need in the trade space, in the small business space, in the construction space for a larger conversation on this. I mean, as an occupation, the construction industry is one of the highest for suicide rates. And there's stats around it, and there's things that there's patterns that we see. And I will credit Paul Cook and Meg Cook. They clients of ours, Painters USA. Paul's also a coach. He has pushed safety as a huge topic within the organization. The physical safety, the having the safety manual, but he's also pushed the importance of mental health. And he was one of the ones that first kind of initiated, let's get a mental health speaker on our safety peer group. And that rolled into, we need to do this on a larger scale. And then this has rolled into, now we're going to be offering through you mental health first aid certification program, which I'm thrilled about. And I hope that we can kind of continue the gratitude that was felt at the conference, the seeing the importance of it, and kind of not lose steam behind that, and kind of continue to give opportunity to business owners and leaders, anybody who manages somebody, the tools and resources to be able to help. So part of why, we wanted to talk about this, because I think we need to keep talking about it as leaders in the industry. It's our job to make sure that we're bringing these topics into the conversation and finding folks like yourself who can help us do that. You have worked with so many organizations. It's, through trainings, one-on-one with people. What are you seeing in terms of mental health challenges affecting teams and in these high pressure, physically demanding work environments? Maybe not even physically demanding like the trades, but just these high pressure, stressful environments. What are the challenges that you're seeing?
Yeah, I think Molly, there's right now there are a lot of challenges that all of us are facing in this world today, and I think it's
Hmm.
different for each one of us. And I think if you think about in the trades, and you think about sometimes in trades, there's more. I should say there's more opportunity. I don't know if opportunity is the right word, but there's more injuries, and sometimes with injuries there's pain, and when there's pain, we get treated with medication that can lead to addiction. And we know that also that these are physically a lot of times demanding and dangerous work, which can be chronic pain. So some people may be having chronic pain, and which is obviously impacting. It could be longer hours, irregular
Yeah,
schedule, which creates family strain and isolation. We think about layoffs or job insecurity of what's going on, the financial stress that's going on in our world. You think about the male dominated culture where stigma says don't talk about it and don't ask for help. And I also think about where do you get care? So let's say
yeah,
that I step forward and say, hey, I've got a problem. I think I have a problem. Where do I go and how do I get started? And I think what's interesting is that in all of these trainings, I'll tell you a quick story. I was in a training in downtown Boston and heard a man in the corner say, you know what, we shouldn't be talking about mental health in the workplace. And I've learned in my life to be curious and less judgmental. It allows me to maybe understand a little bit about where they were coming from. And we
yeah,
quickly did an exercise where we put up on the flip charts in the room, what are the challenges that we're facing? Matter of fact, we did this at the conference as well. And the challenges were tremendous. I mean,
mhm,
vast when you looked at all of the different things. Maybe it's divorce, maybe it's death of a loved one, maybe it's issues with childcare, maybe it's with a kid that's struggling. And once we had those lists up on the walls and all of his colleagues had put all the different challenges that people were facing, he goes, okay, we need to talk about this.
yeah.
And
The writing's on the wall,
yeah,
literally.
literally, right? And he
Yeah,
realized that, wow, all of us are coming in with all of these different challenges. Now, remember, mental health challenges do not mean that someone has a mental health illness or a mental disorder.
right.
It may be that it's a challenge that might need a doctor, might not need a doctor in order to work through whatever that challenge is. What's very interesting is at the end of that training, this man shared that he had a kid who had been struggling with alcohol addiction. And he thought, he had missed work. He had takes phone calls at all the different times in meetings. And he said, I'm sure many of you in this room probably wondered what's going on in my life, but I didn't feel like I could tell it to you. Couldn't tell you. But he goes, if he had
Yeah.
had cancer, if he had had some other kind of chronic back pain, he goes, of course I would have shared you with what's going on. And it made me, again, if I'm curious versus judgmental, I recognize that talking about this in the workplace is important because we know the effect of it is that people are missing work. We know that they are struggling and may have financial issues. I mean, lots of different things that could be a result of
Yeah.
having these challenges. And so, again, how do we get those folks that support, which is really important?
I mean, it's one of the most complex things about, I think, managing people. Managing people is really difficult. And oftentimes it's because part of that job is to truly understand the people that, you are managing. And when they don't show up for work or when they're not being as productive and something feels off, it's the ability to peel back, to dive deeper, what's really going on, and not just kind of make assumptions about how this person is showing up because they don't want to be there, they don't care. That, I mean, you bring your whole self to work. It's hard. I mean, I don't know how you don't. We're all juggling way too many things in life to be able to act like there's nothing else going on, beyond the work day. But that's, I think, why managing people is so hard, because the ability to be able to do that right and know when and know the warning science. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges out there is so often you probably know that, owners, managers, when we're talking about a workplace, they miss the warning signs where something is wrong.
Yeah, and I think, Molly, that's why over the past 5.5 years, I've been inside literally hundreds of companies, either via Zoom or in-person trainings, and people are taking this idea of mental health first aid to heart, just like we
Hmm.
do when it comes to CPR. We talk about first aid, physical first aid, and you talked about your clients focusing on safety, and we as a company focused for 31 years, we focused on physical safety a lot, but talking about
Right.
the psychological safety was really difficult. And one of the things that we talk and really promote in mental health first aid is that our job, especially as leaders, as owners, is to connect before we correct. And that's a really powerful statement, because when we connect with an individual, we understand what might be going on in their life. We are there for them. It's a lot easier then to have a dialogue about maybe things that they're doing great in their job, but also areas that they might need to improve in, so that connecting before they correct. The other one is that we need to learn to focus on caring for people and not worrying about the cause. So focus on the care, not the cause. And both of those are really powerful in the workplace, because rather than worry about, well, why are they doing this? Why are they acting this way?
Yeah.
Our job is really to notice. And that's always the first word that we talk about in mental health first aid. Because if you don't notice, and I think the reason that noticing is so powerful for myself is, for so many years, including the people that I lived with, didn't notice how much pain I was in my life. And I got really, really good from a very young age on how to hide that pain, how to hide that
Yeah.
sadness, how to hide that anger until I couldn't anymore. Right. And I think about, if we all can work on noticing when someone might be struggling. And then what mental health first aid teaches, and people will ask, oh, is this going to be an hour session? It's not an hour session, right?
Yeah. It's a lot. It's a good bit more than that.
It's more than that. And the reason for that is that there's a 5-step action plan that teaches people how to, once you've noticed, what do you do now, right?
Yeah.
How do you approach an individual? If you or I are at coffee with somebody, how do we bring up a tough topic, that we might have heard them say something or realize that they were struggling? How do
Hmm.
we do what's really most important? We talk a lot in the training about listening, that I do this training also for adults who work with youth. And the stats tell us that one adult investing in a youth's life can change everything. And that investment means let that youth bring their whole self to that conversation. And so
Yeah.
we know that what they need more than anything, and all of us need, is how to connect with someone. And that's usually through listening and through giving people reassurance or that hope with facts. And that's the reason I tell my story, is I hope that people hear hope that comes out of a hard story. But there's
Yeah.
also some facts that I couldn't do it on my own. Needed to work with my family doc at different times over the years. I needed to have a trauma therapist who could dig deep and help me understand why I was doing the things that I was doing. And so again, that 5-step action plan really teaches people how to respond if someone's having thoughts of suicide, how to respond if someone's
Hmm.
having a panic attack, how to respond if someone's addicted to substances and they want to stop. And so I gave you the quick preview, but it's life changing. And when I saw this training for the first time in 2020, I said, I'm going to dedicate my life to bringing these skills to other people so that they can apply them
Amazing.
in their lives.
That's amazing because essentially, I mean, these are tools in a toolbox that I think so often are lacking. There's things you just mentioned. Being able to have. Sometimes I would call them these crucial conversations about something that needs to be brought up, but they're terrified because they don't want to say the wrong thing. They don't want to offend. They don't want to trigger. So the easier thing sometimes is to say nothing at all when there's so much impact of that conversation being had.
I had a woman in a training who had lost her son to suicide. And in the training, she said that she was back to work 5 days after his death. And she said, I know that people were judging me, but she said, I had to do something to turn off my mind. And
Mm-hmm.
work was the coping strategy that I needed, even though people may not understand it. She said, secondly, people understanding the financial situation is I had to work to be able to pay for my other kids. There was no big, long, extended time off. She said, I had to get back to work. And she said, what's really difficult is she said, no one ever ask her how she was doing. And she thinks that the stigma was even worse because of it being about suicide. And she said no one ever mentioned her son's name. And she said, alls I
Oh,
wanted, and I think that goes back to Molly, your point about we either say something that's not helpful
yeah.
because we're nervous when someone tells us something, or we don't say anything and we walk by. And what I've learned in this training reminds us over and over again is our job is not to fix the person. Our job is to listen to them and connect with them so that they possibly could start talking about maybe some pain that they're going in and what they're going through.
Yeah, it's like the showing just like an extended hand of I care, I'm thinking about you. Maybe it's not the first time you respond with a little bit more, but the more someone keeps checking in, the more you feel like they're opening up a door here for me to be able to tell them how I really am. And just that's like again, it's going back to just that permission to be able to share is huge. And so this certification is this training that you're going to be leading for clients of ours in March. Can you walk us through a little bit what participants can expect from it, kind of the style of it, and who is this really geared towards?
I think Molly, it can be geared toward everyone
Okay.
because what I find is that we all need to work on how do we notice signs and symptoms and then how do we respond. And so I think one of the things that I've seen really effective in the workplace is that when colleagues, people that work together, whether it's they're all from the same company or across companies, the ability of knowing that you're not alone, that you're in this training where we are talking about panic attacks and we are talking about suicide and we are watching a video on a substance overdose and we are talking about depression, we are talking about anxiety, and we're talking about trauma. And some of that trauma may happen in the workplace, some of the trauma may happen years ago, or it might have happened yesterday, but it
Mm-hmm.
allows us to really talk about things. The good news is it's challenge by choice, so we don't make anybody share anything they don't want to share. What we hope is that people come together, they are willing to participate because it is a training that we will watch videos and we will do breakout rooms and you'll have an opportunity to ask a lot of questions because we find that with these topics, a lot of us have, either built-in stigma ourselves or we have
Mm-hmm.
beliefs that are really not true about a certain topic. And what this does is it breaks those down and allows us to ask questions that maybe we don't feel overly comfortable asking others. I also know that with all the stressors like we talked about in our lives right now is that, having the ability and what's great about it, I did this training at Bloomberg in New York City and I had an HR person come up to me and say, what's interesting is I've done trainings my whole career and this is the first time that the training has actually been for me
Wow.
because he recognized that he could apply mental health first aid to his own life. He could assess what's going on inside of his body. I'm really stressed out. What is going on? He can listen to what's going on or talk to somebody. And so the Bloomberg idea was, and for all the folks that join here, it'll be a training that can be something that's helpful for you. It could be
Mm-hmm.
helpful with your family. It can help. I've used mental health first aid with my neighbors, and I want people to know that this does not mean that you have to use it everywhere you go. But
Right.
you
Right.
but you do find that many times just listening, tell me more, right? Help me understand. Instead of so many times when somebody tells us something, we jump right to the solution. We jump to problem solving, and that's really not what people need. What they really need is for someone to listen. So I go back to leaders. It's helpful because when their employees or managers are really helpful because if their employees are struggling, and somebody's missing work, we look for what's different in the individual, what has changed. And again, the whole training continues to really push it. This is not therapy. We are not the
Yeah.
therapist. I am not a therapist, right? I have a business background, a business degree, but I
Yeah.
learned this training because just like I'm not a doctor and I can apply CPR. Matter of fact, I had to do the Heimlich maneuver on somebody last week
Oh my gosh.
in a restaurant. And I thought about it because I was trained, I knew what to do,
Yeah.
and I think about how physical first aid, why don't we all also have mental health first aid? So if somebody starts having a panic attack, do I know how to respond? And now I do as a result of this
Yeah.
training. So I would think that owners, I know that I have a son that two sons that own a business in Michigan, and one owns businesses in LA. And employees, it's tough right now with what they're
Yeah.
going through and knowing how to respond, because all of a sudden people quit when they're struggling. We know that people have struggles with doing their daily job, you know.
Yeah.
So if we can help them just like we would if they had hurt their arm and they were in a cast, or if they had to use a wheelchair because of a leg injury, we usually do what we can to help that person. Can we do the same thing when it's a mental health challenge? That's really what we have to
Yeah.
ask ourselves.
I can only imagine the opportunity for kind of a culture shift that becomes possible in an organization when this becomes a priority, when managers or leaders have the tools, when mental health is a focus, when it's talked about, resources, when it's normalized within an organization. Have you seen that either just in the work that you've done or in organizations that you've trained, just kind of the shift that can happen when leaders put a focus on this and giving their people the resources?
Yeah, I really have seen that, and I've heard that feedback back. I
Good.
had the opportunity of doing these trainings at a university, and the university, we started with training some students, and then recognized that not only do the students need to know these skills, but we wanted to bring it to the faculty and to the staff. And I worked for the president of the university at the time, and said to the president, I said, we have got to take your leadership team through this training, because if you truly want to transform your culture in the company or in the university, as an example, we need to start at the top. And that's
Hmm.
why I think a lot of times owners coming in, what it did, Molly, is it changed the culture of being that people realize now that others might be struggling. And I want to make sure that we don't just talk about when people struggle. We also talk about the power of self-care, and we talk about gratitude and other things, because I don't want this to sound like, boy, everything is going to be really, really difficult, because it's not,
Hmm.
right? There's a lot of other things that are going on in people's lives. So yeah, I saw it change there. One other story is I did it with a construction company who brought the CEO, the CFO, and their employees. And the CEO afterwards says, I now understand a little bit more about my people. I also recognize that, wow, we probably don't have the best benefits for getting people
Yeah.
help. And I'm going to go take a look at that. And wow, maybe our policies aren't the best. It's easy to say, take a day off and go to therapy. Well, what happens if you're not getting paid for that day? What happens? And can you afford not only not working that day, but can you then afford access to care? And so what we find is that this training, a lot of times, especially for leaders, gets them thinking that, wow, maybe what I need to do is take a look at this is the beginning, the training for your culture, but
Yeah.
what are the benefits that you have? Again, what are the policies and procedures? So again, it's a great training, because we do talk about resources, and does the individual companies offer resources for when people struggling? No, normally we offer resources if someone has a physical issue. Do we offer
Right.
those if someone's having a mental issue?
It's a no-brainer for me. I think any company that we work with, any organization should be making this a priority. But what do you say to those who are on the fence in terms of, investing in this for their people, investing in those policies, investing in the right benefits? Business is expensive, business is messy. We're allocating money in all these different ways. Why does it matter that we are saving a percentage for this?
For me, it's looking at the statistics.
Yeah.
It's looking at the return on investment, that and what I've learned is that asking with whoever it is that provides your benefits on how you can provide benefits. I'm working with a couple small companies right now on helping them set up an employee assistance program.
Amazing.
Actually, not as expensive as you would think. And what it's doing is it's allowing that when that employee is struggling, for the supervisor to be able to say, hey, here's an employee assistance program that can get you started. And versus right now saying, boy, go out into the community and find someone to help you. So imagine you're struggling, you get home at the end of the day. How do you find somebody that you can go to that can help you work through that? I've been reading recently about some urgent cares that are opening up in many states that are saying it's an urgent care for mental health. So that if
Oh, I
somebody's
love that.
really anxious, if they're really struggling and say, I need to go to this urgent care, and they're growing for this exact reason, Molly, is how does a company even go about beginning to change culture? And I think part of it
Yeah.
is we've done some things locally in our community in Michigan where a couple owners demonstrate, and we have the data, and I'm happy to share that, where every dollar that they invested was returned because they didn't lose the employees that were struggling. And
Mm.
many times they said that was the biggest thing, is the retention piece of it. And it's just the right thing to do
Yeah.
because we're helping. But you also got to do it and manage the finances of the company. So there are ways of doing that, but I think there's got to be somebody that's a champion in the organization that says, I'm going to make mental health a priority.
Absolutely. I mean, we've said that about safety. You've got to have a safety champion. We've said that about AI. You got to have an AI champion. Somebody's got to be passionate about it within the organization and kind of own and be accountable to the implementation, or else these things just don't get done. If you could leave us with one word that summarizes this discussion today, what would that be?
I think the word is hope. I recognize that all of us at different times in our life may be struggling, but knowing that by having others around us that can help us on this journey, through the good times, through the tough times, knowing that there are tremendous resources out there for people that are struggling with anxiety, struggling with depression, struggling with bipolar disorder, struggling with substance use disorder, right? There are lots of resources out there, and really good resources. And I think the hope for me is that A, we're having this conversation today and you
Hmm.
had it at the conference. And B is that I'm reminded that when we did the breakouts in the afternoon after the presentation, the folks at the mental health table that I was sitting at was filled.
It
And people,
was. It's one of the
and
busiest
even
tables.
it was, and I thought,
Yeah.
oh goodness.
Yeah.
But it was, I think there was hope there that, you know what, here's somebody that has struggled me. Here's somebody that got the help that he needed, and now he's out sharing the story. Wow. I think every time that happens, we can all think of someone we know in our life that might be struggling, and we aren't sure how to have that conversation. Hope tells me that things can change, and
That's
change
a
in that.
great word. And we are happy to be kind of a conduit of information and connection to the person that has the expertise, that has the resources. It's part of what we do here is we don't claim to be anything that we're not. And when we know that, there's an avenue, there's a field where we need to bring in someone who has that expertise, we go looking. And I'm so grateful that we are able to kind of make that connection to you and to give our clients and our listeners here that conduit to you, that resource. As we mentioned, we are hosting a mental health first aid workshop in March here with Rob. Very excited to do so. Registration is currently open. You can check in Summit Weekly and on Summit Connect. But for Rob, for those listeners who want to learn more about you or maybe want to connect with you outside of the workshop, what's the best way to get in touch with you?
Yeah, Molly, I can be reached at Rob Valentine with two L's, Vallentine at gmail.com. And I am happy to talk to anyone about this topic, and whether it's about the mental health first aid training coming up, if it's about strategy, if it's just about, hey, I don't know where to start with my
Mm-hmm.
mental health strategy. I'm happy to talk to anyone and share my perspective. I'm working right now with the state of Michigan, where they are going out and really starting grassroots with mental health 101 and moving into, trauma and resilience in the workplace, and taking a look at how do people tell their stories to break the stigma. And so not only do we see companies trying to do this, but government is also trying to say, hey, how can I help companies that are in need as well? So just happy about that one as well.
It's good stuff. Here's to hope, to seeing a movement kind of continue to progress forward that's been in the dark for a very, very long time. Well, thank you, Rob. I'm always going to say until next time, because I'd love to bring you back on in the future. I think it is our responsibility here at Nolan Consulting Group to continue to bring this topic up every, maybe 6 months, at least annually, to make sure that we're not forgetting about it, that we are revisiting, we are bringing new resources to the table so that we can make sure our listeners have that information as well. So I'll say to you until next time.
Thanks, Molly. Have a great day.
Thank you.